بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. Respected brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, we are going to be concluding the commentary on the Shaqshaqiya sermon, which is sermon number 3 in Nahjul Balagha. And it is the sermon that Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib talks about the Khilafah, talks about the Caliphate. And he describes how it was taken away from, how he was the most qualified, how it was taken away from him in the Saqifa. And then Abu Bakr passed it on to Umar, and then Umar passed it on to Uthman through the system of the six men voting. And then we mentioned how he was talking about the corruption that was taking place during the time of Uthman. And then Uthman, he brought it down upon himself until the Muslims killed him. Then the Khilafah, the Muslims, they came running to Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. Of course, then several groups emerged and they blamed the murder of Uthman on Imam Ali alayhi salam because the Khilafah came to him after Uthman. So they were pointing the fingers saying Imam Ali alayhi salam, he was the one who basically tried to get Uthman killed, and he was responsible for the murder of Uthman when Amir al-Mu'mineen had nothing to do with it. Amir al-Mu'mineen, in fact, Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib, he tried to save the life of Uthman, even though he doesn't agree with Uthman, even though Uthman did many things that brought his own demise. Amir al-Mu'mineen tried to save his life. So inshallah, we will talk about this. And I want to go a little bit in detail on what did Uthman do, why did the Muslims kill him, and who was responsible in the murder of Uthman, so that later on we will understand how Amir al-Mu'mineen was oppressed once again when they blamed him for the murder of Uthman. So after 20 years of being patient, after 20 years of not having a position, even though he was the closest person to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, even though he was the first Muslim, even though he was the first defender of Islam, Amir al-Mu'mineen had no role whatsoever during the Khilafah of Abu Bakr, which was for 2 years, and then the Khilafah of Umar ibn al-Khattab, which was for 10 years, and then the Khilafah of Uthman, which was for 12 years. So 24 years, Amir al-Mu'mineen was not given an official position. Yes, of course, Amir al-Mu'mineen, because he was worried about Islam, he was worried about the Muslim community, about the Quran. So he would teach and he would guide them when they would come and they would ask him questions. But other than that, Amir al-Mu'mineen was not given any specific role. So after the 24 years, now the Muslims, they come running to Amir al-Mu'mineen, begging him to take the position of leadership. So what happened? Why was Uthman killed? Uthman was killed, Amir al-Mu'mineen, he said earlier, we were saying, he said, because of وَقَامَ مَعَهُ بَنُو أَبِيهِ يَخْضِمُونَ مَالَ اللَّهِ خِضْمَ الْإِبْلِ نَبْتَةَ الرَّبِيعِ إِلَىٰ أَنْ انْتَكَثَ عَلَيْهِ فَتْلُهُ وَأَجْهَزَ عَلَيْهِ عَمَلُهُ وَكَبَتَ بِهِ بَطْنَتُهُ. Meaning he caused his own demise. He caused his own downfall. And the people, the corruption became very widespread. He brought his family, Bani Umayyah, the Umayyads, and he was giving them money here and there. The people of Medina, who many of them were Sahaba of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the companions of the Prophet, and the people of the major cities. You have Kufa. Kufa was a major city in Iraq, and Basra. Basra is in the south of Iraq. Kufa is right now very close to Najaf. So these were the two major cities in Iraq, and they're called Al-Iraqain, the two Iraq cities. That time, Baghdad did not exist, Karbala did not exist. All of these places, they weren't developed. So you had Kufa and you had Basra. which were cities. And the people of these cities, they were very upset with what was going on. So they come and they want to protest. So they go, they do Umrah. They say, we're doing Umrah. We're going from these cities. Oh, you also had people from Egypt coming as well. So they go to Mecca to do the Umrah. And then instead of going back home, instead of going back to their own cities, they come to Medina, which is about, it's like a 3-4 hour drive right now from from Mecca to Medina. So it's a 10-day, probably a 10-day camel ride between Mecca and Medina. They come and then they gather around the house of Uthman and they tell him, what's all this oppression? What's all of this corruption? And we want our rights. Of course, it didn't escalate it took a very long time. Over those 12 years, it took about 12 years for the Muslims to lose their patience with Uthman. Uthman, as soon as he came to power, he started breaking the rules of Islam and the customs that the previous Khulafa had placed before him. Even though they were like Abu Bakr and Umar, it wasn't their rightful position, but they didn't live an extravagant lifestyle. Uthman, on the other hand, the Khilafah did not belong to him, just like Abu Bakr and Umar, but he lived a very extravagant lifestyle where he made many of the Muslims very upset and angry with him. So, and he began to break many rules. For example, when Umar was killed by a Persian. His name is Abu Lu'lu'a. And Abu Lu'lu', he killed Umar and he escaped. So his son, Ubaydullah ibn Umar, he goes and he kills 2 innocent Persians. He's looking for Abu Lu'lu'. He doesn't find him. He comes and he kills 2 innocent Persians. So when Amir al-Mu'mineen, he found out, he said he needs to be held accountable. Uthman had just taken power. He said his father was just killed. We don't want to cause another problem. Leave him. Amir al-Mu'mineen said that if power comes to me one day, I'm going to hold him responsible because he killed 2 innocent people. So this was one. Then he began to do things where the Sahaba began to turn against him. Ammar ibn Yasir, he was delivering a letter which the people from the cities, from Kufa, from other places, they had given him to deliver, objecting to some of the ways Uthman was ruling. He began to beat Ammar. Ammar is one of the early Muslims. His parents, Yasir and Sumayya, were the first martyrs in Islam, the first shuhada in Islam, and Ammar was killed in the battle fighting against Muawiyah. He was on the side of Amir al-Mu'mineen, and he was always a devout follower of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Abu Dhar, another devout follower of Amir al-Mu'mineen, he died during the time of Uthman, and he was sentenced to go and live between Mecca and Medina in the desert. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, one of the memorizers of the Quran, he very much praised with the Sunnis and Shias as well. A lot of them don't have an issue with him. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, he was beat up by the order of Uthman, and his name was taken off from the list of those who receive a monthly or weekly stipend and salary. So the Sahaba, they turned against Uthman. And we mentioned where even Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, she had a very big role. She was saying hadith, Rasulullah said this, Rasulullah did that. Even Aisha turned against Uthman, and he turned against her as well, because he saw that she was going too far, and she saw that he wasn't giving her the freedom that she had. She's the daughter of Abu Bakr, and Umar also gave her a lot of freedom to go out and speak and say, Rasulullah did this, Rasulullah said that. Uthman was not very comfortable with that. So they had animosity with one another. And in a hadith, she came out, and when Uthman was under siege, she basically instigated, and she took out the shirt of Rasulullah from his house, and she said the shirt of Rasulullah has not decayed while Uthman has turned against the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And in another statement, she says, "Uqtulu na'thalan faqad kafar." Kill Na'thal. Na'thal means this old man. Kill him, he has done kufr, referring to Uthman. And of course, she said this. And while Uthman was under siege, she went and she left Medina and she went to Mecca. She went to Mecca. She says, I want to perform Umrah. So she didn't really save his life. Now, hold on to this thought. No, this is very important because later on, she was one of those who blamed Amir al-Mu'mineen for the murder of Uthman, even though Amir al-Mu'mineen had nothing to do with it. So now keep in mind, she says, he has turned against the sunnah of the Prophet. اقتلوا نعثلا فقد كفر. She leaves him. She doesn't show any support. Talha and Zubayr. Remember we said Zubayr, he was the one who voted for Amir al-Mu'mineen because he's kind of related to Amir al-Mu'mineen. Talha was not. He didn't like Amir al-Mu'mineen. But they both turned against Uthman, even though Talha voted for Uthman. They both turned against Uthman. And this is also very important because Talha and Zubayr, they used Aisha, because Aisha, she's the wife of the Prophet, in the Battle of Jamal, in the first civil war, which came several months after Amir al-Mu'mineen took power. And they go to Basra, and there's a war that is fought against Amir al-Mu'mineen, Talha and Zubayr and Aisha on one side, and on the other side, Amir al-Mu'mineen and his companions. So this is also, Talha and Zubayr, they also conspired against Uthman. Now, the protesters, what was going on? Why did they protest against, and how did they protest against Uthman? The protesters from Kufa, Basra, and Egypt, they marched to Medina. So they were protesting. So Imam Ali alayhi salam, he comes to Uthman and he tells him, listen, you are the Khalifa right now, you have the position of the Khilafah, and you know what I know, and you're not in it, you know everything. I don't need to come and tell you do this and do that. You've been with the Prophet, you know the issues and the events, and you are breaking the rules. You are breaking the norms and you are making them upset. So why are you listening to Marwan? Marwan was his son-in-law. He was Marwan ibn al-Hakam. Remember we said there was a man who used to make fun of the Prophet, al-Hakam. The Prophet expelled him. Abu Bakr did not bring him back. Umar did not bring him back. As soon as Uthman came, he brought him back. And the son of al-Hakam, Marwan, married Uthman's daughter. So Marwan, he had a very big role in the government and the Khilafah of Uthman. And it was because of the actions of Marwan that many people were turning against Uthman. He was giving him the green light. He was allowing him to do whatever he wants. So Amir al-Mu'mineen, in a sermon, he tells him, don't let Marwan lead you. Don't let Marwan control you. And see what they want and give them some of their orders. You've been taking money and giving it to Bani Umayyah here and there, and these people, they're suffering, they need money. So Uthman, he says, yes, I accept. He goes out and he tells them, I will give you whatever you want. The protesters, they go back. The protesters, they want to go back. On their way back to Basra, they see the camel that came out of the palace of Uthman. And they see a rider, a messenger, who came out of the palace of Uthman, and they see a letter. He's carrying a letter, and they intercept him. They see that they're going to Basra, and this camel rider is also going to Basra. So they go and they catch him. They see he has a letter, which is signed by the seal of Uthman. It says, and it's an order to the governor of Basra, telling him, as soon as these people come, these were protesters, as soon as they come, you crucify them. You kill them and you crucify them. So now these protesters, they saw that Uthman came out and he said, yes, I'm going to apologize and I'm going to change things. But then at the same time, there's a letter coming out and telling the governor in Basra. So as soon as they enter Basra, they're going to be held, they're going to be arrested. So what do? They turn around and they go back to Uthman. Now the siege around the house of Uthman begins, and it goes for over 40 days. They tell him, who was this letter from? He says, the camel is my camel, the seal is my camel, but the handwriting is not my handwriting. It was the handwriting of Marwan. They tell him, okay, hand us over Marwan. He tried to get us killed. Hand us over Marwan. He says, no. He keeps Marwan, so the siege continues. Then one day, Niyaz ibn Iyadh, during those 40 days, one of the Muslims, one of the Sahaba, Niyaz ibn Iyadh, who was one of those who was holding the siege against in the house of Uthman, he was shot by an arrow coming out of the house of Uthman. So the Muslims now, they become more angry and they tell him, give us the one who killed him. He says, no, I will not hand him over. So they basically attack the house of Uthman, and Uthman is killed in the process, and this mob kills Uthman. Of course, Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib, he tried to protect the life. He tried to send Imam al-Hassan and Imam al-Hussein to go and protect the life of Uthman, but it was a mob and they were very angry, and Uthman was not listening. He was not doing anything to do anything to calm down the anger, except there was more anger and there was more rage. So eventually Uthman was killed, and the murder and the assassination of Uthman, it cast a dark shadow over the Khilafah of the next one who came, and that was Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. So now, what was the role of the Muslims in the assassination of Uthman? First of all, Imam Ali alayhi salam had nothing to do with it. He tried to intervene. He even sent Imam al-Hassan and Imam al-Hussein to go and protect the house of Uthman. Now, not because Uthman was innocent and not because of love for Uthman, but Amir al-Mu'mineen knows that if Uthman is killed while he's in power, then this is going to cause a fitna that's not going to stop. It's going to cause bloodshed. It's going to cause a lot of bloodshed, and it did cause bloodshed. The Battle of Jamal and the Battle of Siffin and the Battle of Nahrawan were caused by the murder of Uthman. So it did cause bloodshed. Amir al-Mu'mineen tried to stop that. So Amir al-Mu'mineen, he goes to Uthman, he tries to give him advice, but they don't listen. He doesn't listen. He tries to calm down the protesters. They don't listen until things get out of control. And it's not like Amir al-Mu'mineen was in control of what was going on. If he was in control, the Khilafah would not have been taken away from him during the time of Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman. Amir al-Mu'mineen was just he was very much respected, but during their anger, they would not listen to him, as we will see later on in the struggles that he had to deal with his own people. While he was Khalifa, they would not listen to him. So Amir al-Mu'mineen did not instigate. He had nothing to do with inciting the fitna against Uthman. Now, of course, there are some people that tried to blame the murder and assassination of Uthman on Amir al-Mu'mineen, as those in the Battle of Jamal and those in the Battle of Siffin tried. And until today, some people, they come and they say Ali ibn Abi Talib, he had a role, and it was those first Shi'as that had a role in the murder of Uthman, when Amir al-Mu'mineen and his followers had nothing to do with the murder of Uthman, even though they did not regard Uthman as someone who was qualified and someone who was leading the Khilafah in a correct way. Aisha, Talha, and Zubair, they fueled the angry mob. Some of them, perhaps Talha and Zubair, they had an active role in the murder and assassination of Uthman. Muawiyah was the governor of Damascus, appointed during the time of Umar. He was appointed, and then Uthman came to power, and because they're relatives, Muawiyah became a lot stronger. Uthman sent a letter to Muawiyah in Damascus that, send your army, come and save me, I'm under siege. So Muawiyah, he comes with 12,000 soldiers from Damascus, but instead of allowing them to enter, he keeps them at the border of Medina. He doesn't allow them to enter, and he goes in himself. Uthman sees him. He tells him, why didn't you bring the soldiers? He tells him, I know exactly why you didn't bring the soldiers, because you are going to be the biggest beneficiary if I am killed. Then that's going to give Muawiyah the excuse to continue fighting Amir al-Mu'mineen and reject the Khilafah of Amir al-Mu'mineen. So Uthman was killed, and for 3 days, they did not even allow anyone to bury the body of Uthman until Amir al-Mu'mineen, he ordered them, even though even if you don't agree with someone, if a person is a Muslim, they have to be buried. So Amir al-Mu'mineen ordered them to bury him. They go and they bury him outside of the walls of Baqi'. Right now, if you go to Medina, you see there's the Baqi' cemetery, which the Muslims are buried in. Now, at that time, the cemetery was a lot smaller than what it was right now. There used to be a wall. They come and they bury Uthman outside, on the other side of the wall, outside of the Muslim part of the cemetery. So later on, once Muawiyah comes to power many years later, he comes and he brings down that wall to include Uthman in the Muslim cemetery. So today when you go, you see, you have to go walk very far, not where the Imams are. You have to go walk very far and they'll tell you this is the grave of Uthman. But initially that was outside of the Muslim cemetery. And this was by the act of the Muslims and the Sahaba themselves, the companions of Rasulullah. They buried Uthman outside of the Muslim cemetery. Now, 5 days after the murder of Uthman, for 5 days, there was no Khalifa for the Muslims. They don't know what to do. The Khalifa has just been killed. His house was burned. He was killed, and it was a very messy, way that he was killed. So what do? They don't know where to go until Ammar, Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, and Ibn al-Tayyihan, they nominated Imam Ali alayhi salam to take the leadership. So once they nominated the name of Amir al-Mu'mineen, the Muslims came rushing to the house of Amir al-Mu'mineen and they began to beg him to take power. So Amir al-Mu'mineen, they begin to beg him. What does he say? He says, دعوني والتمسوا غيري فإنا مستقبلون أمرا له وجوه وله ألوان لا تقوم له القلوب ولا تثبت العقول. He tells them, go and find someone other than me. Because if I take leadership, there are going to be very difficult times ahead of us, and you will not be able to handle the decisions that I make. Your hearts and your minds and your faith is not strong enough to handle it. Now, Amir al-Mu'mineen is not saying, I don't want leadership. He's not saying, I am not qualified for the leadership. He's asking them, are you qualified for me to lead? Because you need to be qualified. Right now, one of the issues with Imam al-Mahdi, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu al-Sharif, some people say, why isn't the Imam coming? Is he not ready? No, the Imam is ready. The Imam has been born ready. The question is, are we ready or are we not ready? We're probably not ready. That's why the Imam is being delayed. That's why all of the Imams did not rebel. That's why the majority of the Imams did not take positions of power. Why? Because their people were not ready. So Imam Ali alayhi salam, he's telling them, go find someone else because I don't think you are qualified. I don't think you are going to be able to accept me and accept the principles that I stand for. He tells them, if I rule, I will rule the way Rasulullah ruled. If I take power and leadership, I will take it the way Rasulullah did. And this is why later on when they saw Imam Ali alayhi salam, they saw Imam Ali praying in Basra. After the battle of Jamal, they saw Amir al-Mu'mineen praying. Some of those Sahaba, companions of the Prophet, they remembered, they saw Imam Ali praying, they said, now we remember this is how Rasulullah used to pray. What does this mean? This means that those who came after Rasulullah, they diverted the ummah. Why is there so many differences? Right now today Muslims are praying like this or like that. Why? If all the Sahaba, they saw the Prophet pray, why do we have so much differences? Because some of them, they changed. Amir al-Mu'mineen says, I'm going to take things back to the way Rasulullah had them. So at that time, at the heat of the moment, the majority of the Muslims, and this was probably the biggest majority that chose one of the Khalifas, because Abu Bakr was chosen in the Saqifa by a handful of people, and then martial law was put in place, and then people were forced to give bay'ah to Abu Bakr, just as Amir al-Mu'mineen was forced to. They brought his hand and they put it in the hands of Abu Bakr after the house of Fatima al-Zahra was attacked, and many of the Muslims were forced to give bay'ah. Umar was not even chosen by the Muslims. He was appointed by Abu Bakr. Uthman, that 6-member way that we talked about. Now this time, the Muslims, they come rushing to Amir al-Mu'mineen and they tell him, you have to take power. So they come and they basically, Amir al-Mu'mineen describes, which we will read right now, they begin to push Amir al-Mu'mineen, telling him, you have to take the power. So the majority of the Muslims, they come to Amir al-Mu'mineen and they ask him to take the leadership. There were some that refused to give bay'ah to Amir al-Mu'mineen. One of those members of the 6, remember we said one of them was Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, the father of Umar ibn Sa'd. He refused to give bay'ah to Amir al-Mu'mineen. Abdullah ibn Umar, Abdullah the son of Umar, he refused to give bay'ah to Amir al-Mu'mineen. Um, and what's ironic is that many years later, after the martyrdom of Imam al-Hussein, there was a rebellion in Mecca and Medina. So Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi, one of the tyrants of the Umayyas, he comes and he kills Abdullah, the son of Zubayr, who had basically established a caliphate in Mecca. And Abdullah ibn Umar is an old man now. He has not given bay'at. He did not give bay'at to Amir al-Mu'mineen. But now Al-Hajjaj, who has come killing people, chopping off heads, he comes, Abdullah ibn Umar comes to him in the middle of the night and he tells him, I want to give you bay'ah. Because I heard Rasulullah say, the one who dies without giving bay'ah to their leader dies the death of the pagans. So he comes and he tells him, here's my feet. My hands are busy eating right now. Abdullah ibn Umar gives bay'ah to the feet of Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi. But he refused to give bay'ah to Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. Another one is An-Nu'man ibn Bashir. An-Nu'man ibn Bashir, later on, coming on to about 20 years later or more, close to the martyrdom of Imam al-Hussein, An-Nu'man ibn Bashir was the governor in Kufa. He was very close to the Umayyads. He was very loyal to them. So they give him that power. An-Nu'man ibn Bashir, he doesn't give bay'ah to Amir al-Mu'mineen. He doesn't give allegiance to Amir al-Mu'mineen. He goes and he takes this blood-stained shirt of Uthman and the finger of Uthman that was cut off in the fighting. He takes them and he goes all the way to Damascus to cry in front of everyone that Uthman has been killed. And this fuels the anger against Imam Ali, who had nothing to do with it, but we will explain how that was something that was used against Imam Ali alayhi salam. So, but the majority of the Muslims in Medina, they give bay'ah to Amir al-Mu'mineen, and Amir al-Mu'mineen was the most qualified person. He was chosen by the Prophet. He was the most knowledgeable. He has the history of jihad. He's the purest. He's the most principled one. So now Amir al-Mu'mineen in his sermon, a Shaqshaqiya sermon, after he says that Uthman was killed because of his actions, and then he says, فَمَا رَاعَنِي إِلَّا وَالنَّاسُ إِلَيَّ كَعُرْفِ الضَّبْعِ ينثالون علي من كل جانب حتى لقد وطئ الحسنان وشق أطفاي مجتمعين حولي كربيضة الغنم. He says, at that moment, after the murder of Uthman, nothing took me by surprise but the crowd of people rushing to me. Meaning Amir al-Mu'mineen was not even looking for power. He was surprised by that. He saw the people coming and rushing to him, and then he says, it advanced towards me from every side, the people, like the mane of the hyena, so much so that Hassan and Hussein were getting crushed, and both the ends of my shoulder garment were torn. They collected around me like a herd of sheep and goats. So basically, Amir al-Mu'mineen, he's trying to say that, first of all, I was surprised that because for 24 years, no one wanted to give bay'ah to Amir al-Mu'mineen. They kept skipping Amir al-Mu'mineen. He says, فَمَا رَاعَنِي إِلَّا وَالنَّاسِ إِلَيَّ كَعُرْفِ الضَّبْعِ. He's describing people surrounding him like the mane of the hyena. The hyena mane is very thick. So he says, this is to describe how, this is the eloquence of Amir al-Mu'mineen, to describe how many people were all gathered and crowded. He says they gathered around me like the hyena mane. And of course here, this shows that Amir al-Mu'mineen had seen hyenas, and because at that time you travel in the desert, so you would see them. So he says, وَالنَّاسِ إِلَيَّ كَعُرْفِ الضَّبْعِ يَنْثَالُونَ عَلَيَّ مِنْ كُلِّ جَانِبٍ. And they come, they're surrounding me from every side, حَتَّى لَقَدْ وُطِئَ الْحَسَنَانِ. Even Imam al-Hasan and Imam al-Hussein, who were trying to protect the life of their father and trying to, hold back the crowd. He says even Imam al-Hasan and Imam al-Hussein, they were pushed, and they were the grandchildren of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. They were getting crushed, and وَشُقَّ أَطْفَاي. Even my garment, my shoulder garment was torn, meaning they began to basically pull on the clothes of Amir al-Mu'mineen, telling him, we have no one else other than you. They collected around me like a herd of sheep and goats, meaning they all gathered around Amir al-Mu'mineen. So now Amir al-Mu'mineen, he's describing how the Muslims, they came and they all gave bay'ah, and it was basically the first time that the Muslims are all giving allegiance to Amir al-Mu'mineen. And this has not happened before. Even though today some people, they say the Khalifa must be democratically chosen, but it wasn't democratically chosen in the first three. This was the first time that you have a large group of people coming and begging Imam Ali to take power. First he tells them no, then they beg him, so then he accepts. So he says, فَلَمَّا نَهَضْتُ بِالْأَمْرِ, when I took up the reins of government, نكثت طائفة ومرقت أخرى وفسق أو وقسط آخرون. He says, when I took up the reins of government, now he talks about the three groups that rebelled against Amir al-Mu'mineen, the Nakithin and the Mariqeen and the Qasitin. Three groups of people who Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa told Amir al-Mu'mineen that they will rebel against him, and he instructed Amir al-Mu'mineen to fight them. So he says, فَلَمَّا نَهَضْتُ بِالْأَمْرِ, after I came to power, نَكَثَتْ طَائِفَةً, one group of people, they were the Nakithin. Who are the Nakithin? The Nakithin, they are nakth al-bay'ah. It means when you give allegiance and you take back the allegiance. That's called nakth al-bay'ah. So these are a group of people that gave allegiance and they know who Amir al-Mu'mineen is. It's not like a group of people who do not know. They know who the Prophet is, they know who the Quran, and they know everything, but they, despite all of that, they rebelled against Imam Ali alayhi salam. Who are they? This is a description. The Nakithin, this is a term to describe those who fought against Amir al-Mu'mineen in the first civil war in Islam, the Battle of Jamal, the Battle of the Camel, and that was because Aisha, she was riding a camel. She came out in the middle of the battlefield, and the Muslims have to protect the life of the wife of the Prophet. So that put the lives of thousands of Muslims at risk. And she goes to Basra and she's riding a camel. So the name of the battle is Ma'rakat al-Jamal, the Battle of the Camel. And that was led by Aisha and Talha and Zubair. Some of those people who were very close to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Aisha is one of the wives of the Prophet. Zubair is related to the Prophet. He's the cousin of Amir al-Mu'mineen, the cousin of the Prophet from his mother's side. And Talha was also one of those who were Muslims, and they were with the Prophet from, early on. But so you would expect that they would be those who would know who Amir al-Mu'mineen is, and they would not fight Amir al-Mu'mineen, but they turned back against Amir al-Mu'mineen. Why did they? Aisha, she went to, while the house of Uthman was under siege, she leaves after she says, kill Nahjul, he has done kufr and the shirt of the Prophet. She goes to Mecca. She hears that Uthman was killed. She stays in Mecca. Then Talha and Zubair, they come to her. Aisha, she had hatred for Amir al-Mu'mineen from day one. She even says, if you read some of her words, she says, I was jealous of Ali ibn Abi Talib. I was jealous of Fatima al-Zahra. And I wasn't comfortable that Ali ibn Abi Talib was so close to the Prophet. She tried to get her father, and Hafsa tried to get her father Umar to be closer to the Prophet, and Amir al-Mu'mineen was the closest to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So she didn't like Amir al-Mu'mineen from day one. And we see this, it's not a secret. She waged a war against Amir al-Mu'mineen. And even later on, when she heard that Amir al-Mu'mineen was killed, many years later, when Amir al-Mu'mineen was killed while he was praying, she said a poem basically saying, praise be to the one who tells me that Ali ibn Abi Talib was killed. And she was very happy and delighted to hear that. So Aisha, her hatred for Amir al-Mu'mineen and later on for Imam al-Hassan and the Ahl Bayt was something that was, very obvious. It wasn't a secret. She didn't allow Imam al-Hassan to be buried next to the Prophet, and she ordered for the body of Imam al-Hassan to be shot with arrows, and therefore Imam al-Hassan, the first grandson of the Prophet, was buried in Baqi', not next to the Prophet, while Abu Bakr and Umar, Abu Bakr was the father of Aisha, and Umar, who's the father of Hafsa, they were buried next to the Prophet. So this is Aisha. Talha and Zubair, they know who Amir al-Mu'mineen is. They know Imam Ali is a good person, even though Talha also had issues. But they had ambitions, worldly ambitions. Zubayr wanted to be the governor of Iraq, and Talha wanted to be the governor of Yemen. So as soon as the Khilafah comes to Amir al-Mu'mineen, they go to the Bayt al-Mal, to the Muslim treasury, and they have porters with them, hammalin, those people that carry things. So they come and they tell them, Yalla, come with me. We're going to be carrying a lot of goods out of the Muslim treasury, because this is how Uthman used to treat the people who were loyal to him. So they thought that Imam Ali was going to do the same thing. So they go and they see the person who's running the treasury. Amir al-Mu'mineen was not there at that time. Instead of giving them bags of gold, he gives them 3 dinars. And he gives their porters, the hammalin, the people who are supposed to carry, he also gives them 3 dinars because they're Muslim. So they said, what's going on? He said, this is the order of Amir al-Mu'mineen. I'm not supposed to differentiate between people. We're not supposed to be creating classes. So later on, they come and they see Amir al-Mu'mineen. And he's sitting in a place where where in the Muslim treasury, there's a candle. Now this candle, it does not belong to Amir al-Mu'mineen. It belongs to all of the Muslims. It belongs to the Muslim treasury. The candle is lit. They come and they tell Amir al-Mu'mineen, we have something to talk to you about. He tells them, is it a private matter or is it a public matter? They tell him, no, it's a private matter. So when they tell him it's a private matter, he goes and he blows out the candle. Why? Because the candle belongs to all Muslims. You want to talk to me privately? I'm not going to use a candle that belongs to all of the Muslims. And this is the justice of Amir al-Mu'mineen. So once they saw that Amir al-Mu'mineen, even with a candle, he's not letting go of his principles, they wanted to ask him, each one, to give them leadership of the Iraq and Yemen. They saw Amir al-Mu'mineen is not like that. So what do they tell him? They tell him, we want to go to Umrah. نريد العمرة. He tells them, you don't want Umrah. بل تريدون الغدرة. You want to betray. Umrah and Ghadra. Umrah is going to perform Umrah. He tells them, you don't want to do Umrah. You want to do Ghadra. You want to betray me. And then he lets them go. They go to Mecca, and then from there, they go to Basra, and that leads to the Battle of Jamal. So this is one group. He says, فَلَمَّا نَهَضْتُ بِالْأَمْرِ نَكَثَ الطَّائِفَةِ. One group which basically broke away. Another group, وَمَرَقَتْ أُخْرَى. Another group turned disobedient. Marq, what does that mean? They say this group of people, they left the religion the same way the arrow leaves the bow. يَمْرُقُ السَّهْمِ. So this is referring to, see, there's a skip in the order. It was the Battle of Jamal, and then the Battle of Siffin, and then the Battle of Nahrawan, the Khawarij. Now, the Mariqin, they are the Khawarij. They are those people who, after the Battle of Siffin, they said Ali ibn Abi Talib is a kafir, Ali ibn Abi Talib is a mushrik, and Muawiyah is a mushrik, and we don't want to have anything to do with them. And they forced Imam Ali to basically surrender the war. And then once he surrendered, they tell him, how could you surrender like that? So they turned against Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, alayhi salam, and they basically left religion. They are those people who basically they are better than thou. They saw themselves holier than Amir al-Mu'mineen. And they began to declare and give light and say, this person deserves to live and this person does not deserve to live. Who does that remind you of right now? This reminds you and reminds us of the terrorists today. They might be reading Quran, they might be praying, they might be fasting, they might act all holy, but their mentality is very twisted and they don't know from the Quran other than the meanings that they seek to derive from. These people, the Khawarij, they used to pray and worship, and some of them had the whole Quran memorized, but they fought against Amir al-Mu'mineen. And one of them, Abdul Rahman ibn Muljam, he ended up killing Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib. Abdul Rahman ibn Muljam was one of those people who used to teach the Quran in Kufa. He used to teach the kids and other people how to read the Quran. He goes and he kills Amir al-Mu'mineen. He strikes him while Imam Ali is praying. So Amir al-Mu'mineen says, when I stood for the power, فَلَمَّا نَهَضْتُ بِالْأَمْرِ نَكَثَ الطَّائِفَةِ. One group were the Nakithin, the people of the Battle of Jamal. وَمَرَقَتْ أُخْرَى. The people of the Battle of Nahrawan وقسط آخرون. And another people, they were the قاسطين. Who are these people? قسط means standing up for what's right, establishing justice. But what they did was this, and their battle took place after the Battle of Jamal. And this was by Muawiyah and his people. What were they doing? Muawiyah was very smart. And he was sitting in Damascus and he would cry and he would say, Ali ibn Abi Talib, he killed the Khalifa Uthman. And he would bring out the shirt of Uthman every once in a while, the bloodstained shirt of Uthman, and the Muslims would begin crying. Uthman was killed by Ali ibn Abi Talib. And that would make the people in Sham and Damascus very angry. And he mobilized them to fight against Imam Ali alayhi salam in the Battle of Siffin, where over 40,000 Muslims were killed. So why are they called qasitin? Because qist means to establish justice. So they thought they were establishing justice by seeking vengeance for the murder of Uthman, but they were actually fighting Amir al-Mu'mineen, who had nothing to do with the murder of Uthman. And we said those who actually had something to do with the murder of Uthman, they were those who waged the war. One of them was Muawiyah. He didn't defend Uthman. He wasn't there to show support to Uthman. So these are the three groups of people. Al-Nakithin wal-Qasitin wal-Mariqin. These are the three group of people that Amir al-Mu'mineen was ordered to fight by Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. One of the scholars who has written a book by the name of Al-Mustadrak ala Sahihain. His name is Al-Hakim al-Naysaburi. Al-Hakim al-Naysaburi. This man, Al-Hakim al-Naysaburi, he mentions a lot of hadith which Sahih Muslim and Sahih Bukhari don't mention. Why don't they mention? Because they know that if they mention it, this isn't going to go well with their politics, with their viewpoint. So they don't mention a lot of these hadith in praise of the Ahl Bayt, in praise of Amir al-Mu'mineen. But Al-Hakim al-Naysaburi, what he did is he wrote a book. It's called Al-Mustadrak ala Sahihain, meaning that he says, I'm going to use the same formula that Bukhari used and Muslim used, but I'm going to add the hadith that they did not add. So there were hadith because each narrator of hadith, scholar who compiles, they have a formula. For example, this person, I'm not going to narrate from him. This person, I will narrate. This person, I do not narrate. They have strict conditions when to accept the hadith and when to not accept it. This is why Bukhari is one of the most strict. He does not mention a lot of these hadith. Al-Hakim al-Naysaburi, he came and he used the same formula that Bukhari and Muslim used, but he added ahadith, narrations, that they left out because of their own personal biases. One of those was this hadith, where he mentions, Al-Hakim al-Naysaburi, he mentions this hadith from Abu Ayyub al-Ansari. He says, أمر رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله علي بن أبي طالب بقتال الناكثين والقاسطين والمارقين. The Prophet ordered Rasulullah ordered Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, to fight the Nakithin. He tells him, if the Khilafah does come to you, you have to fight those who turn against the Khilafah. They are the Nakithin. And you fight those who are the Qasitin, those who think they're establishing justice, but they're not, like Muawiyah and his goons and his people. And third, wal-Mariqin, and those who leave the religion, like the Khawarij. So basically, this hadith, which is narrated in Sunni books, this legitimizes the battle of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Now notice, Rasulullah did not order Amir al-Mu'mineen to fight before the Khilafah was given to him. That's why a lot of people, they come and they say, why didn't Amir al-Mu'mineen fight during those 24 years when his house was attacked, when Fatima al-Zahra was, her house was attacked, and when Umar and Abu Bakr and Uthman came to power, why didn't Amir al-Mu'mineen fight? Because Amir al-Mu'mineen was ordered to be patient at that time. And he says, فَصَبَرْتُ وَفِي الْعَيْنِ قَذَا وَفِي الْحَلْقِ شَجَا أَرَى تُرَاثٍ هَبَا. I was ordered to be patient, and I was patient as if there's a thorn in my eye and there's something blocking my airway. But now, after the power does come to Amir al-Mu'mineen, Rasulullah has given Amir al-Mu'mineen a direct order to fight those who stand against him. أمر رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله علي بن أبي طالب بقتال الناكثين والقاسطين والمارقين. He ordered Ali ibn Abi Talib to fight the Nakithin and the Qasitin and the Mariqin. So now we go back to the sermon. He says, as soon as power, فَلَمَّا نَهَضْتُ بِالْأَمْرِ نَكَثَتْ طَائِفَةٌ وَمَرَقَتْ أُخْرَى وَقَسَطَ آخَرُونَ. And then he says, كَأَنَّهُمْ لَمْ يَسْمَعُوا اللَّهَ سبحانه يقول تلك الدار الآخرة نجعلها للذين لا يريدون علوا في الأرض ولا فسادا والعاقبة للمتقين. It's as if they have not heard the word of Allah saying that the abode in the hereafter, we assign it for those who intend not to exalt themselves in the earth, nor to make mischief therein, and the end is best for the pious ones. Meaning that the akhirah is the real life. So then Amir al-Mu'mineen, he says, Bala, yes, they did hear it. Bala wallah laqad sama'uha wa wa'awha walakinnahum haliyat ad-dunya fi a'yunihim waraqahum zibrijuha. Yes, by Allah, they had heard it and understood it, but the world appeared glittering in their eyes and its embellishments seduced them. Meaning they knew I was the one who deserved the Khilafah. But the first ones, they turned against me during the time of Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman. And then once the Khilafah came to me, the battle of Jamal, the battle of Siffin, and then the battle of Nahrawan. So several groups of people all turned against Amir al-Mu'mineen. And this is why Amir al-Mu'mineen was mazloom. Amir al-Mu'mineen was very oppressed, because everyone, and they were all Muslims. They're not aliens. They're not people that came from, outside the Muslim land. No, they're all Muslims, people that had heard the Prophet, that had read the Quran. They knew very well, but they turned against Amir al-Mu'mineen. And then Amir al-Mu'mineen tells them, this is the difference. They fell in love for this dunya, but I did not. And that was the difference between Imam Ali and the others. So here, Amir al-Mu'mineen says, أَمَا وَالَّذِي فَلَقَ الْحَبَّةِ وَبَرَأَ النَّسَمَةِ لولا حضور الحاضر وقيام الحجة بوجود الناصر وما أخذ الله على العلماء ألا يقارئوا على كظة ظالم ولا سغب مظلوم لألقيت حبلها على غاربها ولسقيت آخرها بكأس أولاها ولألفيتم دنياكم هذه أزهد عندي من عفطة عنز. He says, basically he's saying, behold, by him who split the grain to grow and created living beings, meaning by Allah. If people had not come to me and supporters had not exhausted the arguments, meaning if they had not begged me, and if there had been no pledge of Allah with the learned to the effect that they should not accept reluctantly in the gluttony of the oppressors, meaning that the ulama, the scholars, those who know, they have a duty by God that they have to defend the oppressed. He says, and the hunger of the oppressed, I would have cast the rope of the caliphate on its own shoulders. Meaning, if people were not running and begging me to it, and if they did not come to me, and they tried in any way to force me to take the Khilafah, and if it wasn't because God has made it obligatory to defend the truth, I don't even want the Khilafah. What is this Khilafah? I would have thrown the rope of the Caliphate on its own shoulders. And this is a metaphor to when you throw the rope of the camel or the horse on its shoulders, meaning you go whichever way you want, I don't care. So, and then he says, and would have given the last one the same treatment as to the first one, meaning the same way I was patient when it came to Abu Bakr taking the Khilafah, I would have been patient and I wouldn't have even wanted the Khilafah. And then he says, then you would have seen that in my views, this world of yours is no better than the sneezing of a goat. وَلَأَلْفَيْتُمْ دُنْيَاكُمْ هَذِهِ أَزْهَدُ عِنْدِي مِنْ عَفْطَةِ عَنْزٍ. Does the sneeze of a goat have any value? Has no value whatsoever. Amir al-Mu'mineen says, this khilafah, this leadership, all of this, I don't even care about it. It doesn't even have the value of a sneezing of a goat. In another hadith, after one of the battles, there were many of the tribe leaders, they're coming to congratulate Amir al-Mu'mineen. Ibn Abbas, he saw Imam Ali sitting in the tent, fixing his sandals. His sandals were made out of, the bark from the tree. He says, he saw him fixing his sandals. So Ibn Abbas, he tells Imam Ali, you're sitting on the ground fixing your sandals, give it to someone else. And there are these tribe leaders, heads of tribes, they want to congratulate you, dignitaries. He tells him, you see these sandals, how much are they worth? Tells them they're not worth anything. Says this khilafah and this leadership is not even worth these sandals for me, except that I have to stand and defend the oppressed and stand for the truth. So Imam Ali and none of the Imams, they were never after power. And this part of it summarizes this whole sermon. Amir al-Mu'minin is saying this khilafah was this, and I separated myself from it, and then this one took it, and this one took it, and this one took it, and then when they came to me, then this group rebelled and that group. But then if I don't have to stand for justice, if it's not for standing for the truth and defending justice, I don't even care about leadership. So Amir al-Mu'minin here, he says this until قالوا وقام إليه رجل من أهل السواد عند بلوغه إلى هذا الموضع من خطبته فناوله كتابا فأقبل ينظر فيه. While Amir al-Mu'minin was talking, a man comes and interrupts the Imam, and he gives him a letter. Amir al-Mu'minin, he's the Khalifa, he's the leader. He begins to look at the letter. He was basically interrupted. فلما فرغ من قراءته قال له ابن عباس يا أمير المؤمنين لو اضطردت مقالتك من حيث أفضيت. Ibn Abbas, he tells him, oh Amir al-Mu'minin, continue. Tell us what's in your heart, where you left off. So Amir al-Mu'minin, he says, فقال عليه السلام هيهات يا ابن عباس تلك شقشقة هدرت ثم قرت. He tells him, Amir al-Mu'minin tells him, oh Ibn Abbas, this was like the foam of a camel which gushes out, but then it subsided. Meaning that I said what I have to say and that's it. I'm not going to go further. I said what I had to say, and this is why it's called al-Khutbah al-Shaqshaqiya. We mentioned in the first discussion why it's mentioned al-Khutbah al-Shaqshaqiya. So Ibn Abbas, he says, فوالله ما أسفت على كلام قط كأسفي على ذلك الكلام ألا يكون أمير المؤمنين عليه السلام بلغ منه حيث أراد. He says, Ibn Abbas says that he never grieved over any utterance as he did over this one, the last one where Amir al-Mu'minin stopped, because Amir al-Mu'minin could not finish it as he wished to. So Amir al-Mu'minin basically was interrupted and he stopped. So this is the end of the Khutbah al-Shaqshaqiya. It's about the Khilafah of Amir al-Mu'minin and his view on the Khilafah. It shows that he's viewing it as he's the most qualified, but it was taken away from him and he remained patient. Patience was not easy. And then it was taken away another time to an unqualified person who caused mischief. And then it was passed on again in a very, very messed up way in the 6-person council. And then that other, Uthman, came and caused so much mischief where the Muslims, they killed him. And then once the Khilafah came to Amir al-Mu'mineen, Nakithin, Qasitin, Mariqin, they all rebelled against Amir al-Mu'mineen. And then he says to them, if it was not for upholding the truth, I would not even have cared about the Khilafah. And you see that this Khilafah is not even worth the sneezing of a goat. This is the view of the Caliphate in the eyes of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa ala alihi al-Tahirin. Allahumma salli ala